Hi, everybody. My name's Jason Wynn, and a bit about me. So I'm a Microsoft MVP, specializing in Teams, Skype for Business, interoperability. How do we get other products to work with other products? How do we get telephony to work? How do we work with these things? Some of the places I would do and I work with is we run something from Reactor called the Microsoft Cloud User Group. We've got one coming up. You may have seen the notice board on the 18th. We've got a Evolve conference that we spoke about before that's happening on the 21st of October. In addition to that, I run a podcast with Steve called All About 365. So a little bit about me. I've got three little people. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not from London or around these areas. I'm from Chicago via Dallas. And my anecdote, and the reason why I've got my picture of my daughter wearing a Darth Vader costume wearing Microsoft Teams glasses is that I've met Harrison Ford twice, and the second time he remembered who I was. So we were doing a premiere in Dallas. I used to run a movie theater. He came up and I showed him around, and then when I was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, he came up to me and said, "Hey, you're that guy from Texas, aren't you?" So that's me. So a bit about this session is understanding how do we get the most out of our collaboration pieces within calling. How do we make sure what's what for conferencing and calling, and how do we triage these things? How do we understand what's going on? How do we work with these things, the confines of the content that we have? So one of the things we need to understand is how do we get the best out of our actual telephone deployment? And this is a very standard, a very broad aspect of how we would look at it. But with this in, we kind of, any sort of telephone deployment, you have a kickoff, you assess what's going on, you envision, and you report back. And you would do this before you do any piece. So even before we make the first telephone call, we need to understand, we need to set ourselves up for success. And in doing so, what we do is we kick off that project, we understand what the requirements were. So some of the questions yesterday were around, what do we need to do about if we have some sort of requirement for a conferencing or different type of call center aspects or voice recording. And we need to understand what those requirements are. Even before we start worrying about the reporting side of things, we make sure we capture that. Likewise, we assess things. So what is going on? We look at our IT roadmap. We look at our network. We assess what's actually going on. And from that, we start building out that scope, which what we're going to do around our vision piece. And within that, that's when we create our actual roadmap, our reports, and assign these tasks to these people. Now, this is very important because even if I don't have any of the actual reporting set up, if we don't kick off this piece the way it's kind of meant to be, we're destined to find ourselves at the end of the project and realize that we don't have the functionality we need, or we haven't bought the right licenses, or we haven't got what we need to do to have it. So it's always best to kind of follow this, triage this from the beginning bit. So I'll show you in a second. Things have moved on a long way since the likes of OCS and Link, and some of the tooling I'll pull across here in a minute is a Link tool that we actually have for pre-call. So what if my end users want to be able to find out, am I showing what I expect to show, or am I going to present or have that telephone quality what I expect to have? If I'm sat in a Starbucks and I'm using their public Wi-Fi, is the call going to be any good? So if we cast our minds back to quite a few years ago, and some of you may or may not remember this. So this was Microsoft Link 2013 Precall Analytics tool. And what this allowed us to do is to go ahead and assign a login information, so we can set up the user's login. We authenticate against that. We press start. And what it will do now is it's running the tool against Skype for Business Online. So it's going through, hitting Link online. We can see what's happening. This is how the end user can kind of establish, is this call quality going to be any good? Is my network any good? Am I going to have a good jitter? We can see there that it's not brilliant. The Wi-Fi in here is not great. But we can also see the big black bar at the top is around what we're going to be doing around the actual analytics piece around what's the score. So how good is that phone call going to be? So we know that anything closest for us we can get is good. As we see that drop, we realize that things are getting appalling, and we realize that the call quality is not as good as what we need to. So that's kind of the first port is Link call, particularly for Skype for Business users. You can use this diagnostic tool to be able to pull that through.
Is that online?
Yeah, so I'm pulling that my user's homed online, and as you can see here, what it's pulling through is actually telling me which edge server I'm using, what network connection I'm using, what my SSID is, and what my public IP is. That makes sense. So from that, it's very important. So I can see where I'm actually connected to and which edge server I'm going through. So what's my relay? And right now we can see from that we're hitting the media edge 1E, which means I'm hitting Europe and link online. And that's where it's going to be. If I were using this against a on-prem environment, then that server information would be your local server edge information, and that would be your relay information through. So yeah, I may have some older ones. Let's have a quick butchers.
Yeah, no, I was just understanding it was only for premise.
No, I'm absolutely using this on Link Online right now, or Skype for Business Online. So this user is set up in islands mode. So if I wanted to use it for Teams, we now have built into Teams, we can go into settings, and we go devices. And now you can see my pretty little mug on that thing. And likewise, we make a test call. And she's audio. She'll pick up my audio in a second. I can make a test call as I want to call out. That information is being captured in, and what she'll do is she'll repeat back to me the test call in it. And when the call hangs up, it'll tell me what the quality of how that's occurred. If that makes sense. So in a second, she's just chimed at me. She's repeating back to what I just said to you guys. And then in a second, we'll have a couple of green ticks. If the quality is any good, we'll have that confirmation that call has been successful or not from Microsoft's perspective, from the device itself. So there we go. She couldn't hear me because my Microsoft's muted off, but she knew that my quality is bad because I muted it. But she realized the audio out was good, the camera's looking okay, and the network's fine. So that's quite important. For me as an end user, I can go back now and say, oh, pants, I haven't got my right, and then plug in the right audio devices, or make sure I've configured the right devices for that audio call to go out, or be able to receive that. Yeah? So this is something that the end user could triage as and when they need to before they actually make that call. So what if I have a call that I've already established? So if I've made a telephone call earlier and I want to find out, so an end user calls me up and says, Jason, I tried to make some phone calls this morning. The call quality has been appalling. Can you help me out? So what can I do as an admin to try to verify some of this content to validate what's going on? So what we do in that instance is we would go in to the Teams admin console, search out that user. Maybe, maybe not. Here we go. So here's the call quality. I can go in then and say call history. And we start triaging some of this information through. So I can see the phone calls that I've had and when they've had it and what happened through those calls. So here's a video call, or here's an audio call I made to a mobile phone this morning. And I can start seeing how that call quality good was. So right away, I can see that Microsoft's saying that call quality was just fine. So this is an inbound call from a mobile phone to me. So I can go in here and see what my connectivity was. So I can see that I was connected up to a Wi-Fi connection. I can start triaging what type of Wi-Fi, what my drivers are, and how these things were working and how they were working through. Likewise, I can get more content about the system. I can see what the name of the asset tag was. I can find out what actual OS it's running, as well as what version of Skype for Business they're running. In addition to that, I could find out what headset that user's using. So I could start triaging a lot of these things down. And we could take this to a whole nother level as well. When we start going to the Advanced tab and the Debugging tab, we can drill down quite a lot more. So at this point, we could start finding out what the inbound audio stream was. So was it really, really loud where that end user was? So we can try troubleshooting it. Is Microsoft trying to reduce that and fix that for you? Is it doing some sort of analytics against that and then trying to deaden the noise around the end user? Likewise, what's the audio stream like? What's the things that are coming through? And we can start finding out where there's echo around the end user. And all these things we're capturing from the client. Because remember, Microsoft are running from end to end on this. So they're running the client, but they're also running the back office services that Teams is running against. And Microsoft's reporting against all this. So I can see what the end user is. I can see how many CPU cores there are. Likewise, I can start going and triaging into how utilized was the processor at that point in time. So I can start troubleshooting some of these things back. And likewise, one of the things we've had before with another customer is at 12 o'clock on Wednesdays, everybody's call quality was appalling. And what was happening was, I see people smiling in the crowd, they're running an antivirus at that point in time. So every time they were doing an AV update, it was taxing the machine, and machines were ultimately failing over, and they didn't have the processing power to be able to handle it. Likewise, you could find out what more around the network, what IP they're on, signal strength. You get even down to how charged my battery was within my PC. Grabs a lot of content and pulls all those things through, and we start triaging and looking and analyzing what's actually going on with these things. Likewise, we can go back to our end user again. We'll go to debug just to show you the sheer quantity of information you can get from this. It's significant. So I could find out who initiated so it actually initiated by a user. So was it picked up was it automatically picked up, or the end user pick it up? Was there any problems with the network, the media chain? What's going on with the RTP time between the media blob? All the content you can pull from here is genuinely a lot. And what we can start doing is start triaging that content through and analyzing what's going on within that call to start doing the due diligence we need to do to find out whether or not. So this is what if I want to look at one media call. Okay, if I want to look at something like a meeting, we can see here that I've got a, let's go back a little bit. So here's where I joined a five person conference, and I could find out what's going on here. So within this, some people were doing media sharing, and they're grabbing all this information. So what was happening? So somebody's doing a desktop sharing. People were doing audio conferencing. People were dropping in and out of the conference because it's a multi-hour conference. And you can see that people are coming in and dropping out as they needed to. People are adding different media. And in all of these as well, I can triage some of this stuff because this wasn't hosted on mine, but I was an attendee on it. But I could still see what was happening within that environment. Here's another conference of 2 people. And I can see each component of what's going on. So if somebody says to me, so this is me as an end user, joining making a Skype for Business, join a meeting, and I escalated it from a Skype call to a conference, and it's pulled all that back. I can start triaging these things, and again, I can go down to what's the quality of network, what's going on. Now, historically, when we were dealing with Skype for Business on-prem, and we would always, issues were always 1 or 2 things. It was either going to be certificates or it was going to be the network. Now, with online, we've alleviated one of those. We no longer have to worry about the certificates when we're dealing with a pure online play. Now we have to worry about certificates, and that's been taken care of by Microsoft, the certificates. The networking components now being taken care of by Microsoft. And we can see what's going on with those things. So Microsoft, beginning of the year, released what they announced it at Ignite 2018. And in Ignite 2018, they came out and said, we're going to be releasing a new version of call quality dashboard. And with this, we're going to add more functionality. We're going to add some new things. And it's still a little bit in preview. Well, it's a lot of it still in preview. But we'll give you a good look of what's going on. So some of the things that have come out since the Ignite is in where things have come out and evolved even in the last quarter is obviously the purple component, but we need to kind of take ourselves where we started from. So when we had call quality dashboards before within Microsoft, we would have, every updates were around 15 minutes. We didn't have any personal information with it. We had personal information within that, so I can drill down to see that components like we were just looking at a few minutes ago. I can see which user is doing what. We can understand what's going on with the quality of experience. Likewise, it was only for Skype for Business, and realistically, it was Skype for Business and a little bit of Link. When we got the cqd.link.com, we added some stuff, but we took a lot away. We took away the ability to look and dive into what was actually happening with the end users, and we just looked at a holistic view of what was going on within the organization itself. And when we did that, we lost a lot of the functionality of what we actually got out of the call quality dashboard. But you got to remember, it's the first intuition of what was going on with Skype for Business Online and how we were doing this and how we're pushing things through. But involved in that, obviously, we started to get the involvement of what we got out of Teams. But since then, we now have the kind of future state where we're now up to 30 minutes. In reality, we're seeing this happening within about sometimes seconds. and sometimes minutes, where the future state of the call quality dashboard, the content that if I make a telephone call and we go back and review it, we're starting to see that content showing up within the CQD very, very quick. Likewise, the personal information is back within Teams, within the new roadmap. We can see that now. We can start diving into which end users are having the problems, delving into some of these things. Likewise, the reliability. And if you set it properly, you can start doing things from Skype for Business on-prem. You can pull Skype for Business online, and you have Teams. And I'll show you where to pull those things through. And the big piece, and the problem, I don't have the Power BIs with me, but be able to create your own dashboards through these things. So Microsoft will give you the ability to pull the content, query it through, you create the Power BI dashboards that you want, and then we start triaging the content as the way you want it to, this is a huge piece. Now, Microsoft will make the templates available. They'll make a rudimentary ones available to you, and then obviously you need to customize the Power BI from that. But some of the way it looks pretty impressive. So what happened? So Microsoft released V3 towards the end of March. Everybody now, everybody in this room should have it. If you go to cdq.teams.microsoft.com, we'll have it. Now, you still have access to everything that happened in V2, now that's showing up in V3. The important thing to remember is that anything that you have set up in V2, it doesn't automatically transfer to V3. So if you have locations in there, so if you have your networking subnets, if you've done this already, so a quick show of hands, how many people set up location information within CQD? Okay. So we can start triaging what's going on from these locations. So with that, I can put which subnets, what's my user subnets, and when your client logs on, you can pull that information through, and you can start triaging what's happening where. So with that, I can find out if people are using the reactor, or if people are over in Paddington, or if people are in Reading, if people are logging in from Lincoln Square, people logging wherever they're presenting from, we can see where they're pulling from. So that's a bit important bit. Now you need to take that location information, and you can export it and then import it into the next table. Likewise, we can start pulling things through, and we'll touch on it a bit in a minute, is around desktop pieces. So something else they've done now is the end users bit. So remember, we talked about the PII, the personal information. I now have the ability to pull their machine information from them. So I create a list of what my software assets are and what my hardware assets are, and from that I can start triaging what's going on with the call quality dashboard. So I can see whether or not they're using which machines are causing me grief. So if I realize a particular type of laptop running a particular type of Teams they're having no success with making telephone calls, that's my first port of call. So I can start doing that, and I'll show you where you can do that in a second. Again, with this, Microsoft are allowing what's called the REST API for everything that's coming out. That ties into the Azure Data Explorer piece, but it's pulling all that information through, and they're obviously pulling that content, and that's why things are so much quicker. So this is how long it's taken. So if I make a telephone call, in roughly 960 seconds is the average time it's taken me for getting a telephone call from being made into the call quality dashboard. And I've seen it a lot faster than that. So I was playing this morning, and Steve was looking at me like I was mad because I was playing with telephone calls to see how fast I can get this. But in reality, we're looking at around 5 minutes latency from making a telephone call, getting it dropped into the call quality dashboard. So a quick show of hands. How many people have actually played with Call Quality Dashboard? Cool. Okay. So has anybody played with the Call Quality Dashboard V3? Show of hands? Okay. So something we'll notice completely different straight away is when I pull that down that menu, we have a lot more information come through. Within this, they have a lot of default things that we haven't had before now showing up within the Call Quality Dashboard. And with that as well, we now have the ability to drill down into what's going on with the product filter. So if I've set up a hybrid into Office 365, and if I'm running 2019, I now have an option through here which will say Skype for Business on-prem. And what I'll have is I'll be able to triage those things. So I'll be able to look at the analytics and export that out and drop it into this unit here and have pull that content through. And now with that, I'll be able to do all the analytics. It does all the dashboarding for me, but I'll be able to see whether it's Teams. I'll be able to see if it's Skype for Business Online. I'll be able to see if the contents, the problems are resolving, if they're residing within Office 3 or Skype for Business on-prem, and I can triage some of this content back. Likewise, I can look at where my problems are. So you can see the call flow information I have here is actually quite low. So I have, I'm only making about 20 calls a day. Out of this, I can find out what's happening. So one day I had 10% of my calls were rated poor by the actual client itself. And I can just go into here now. We can start triaging and try to find out what's going on and why. Likewise, if I have client information, so I haven't made anything like that, any client to client, none. I can start triaging some of this information through. Likewise, if I have reliability reports, I have the ability now to look into these things and try to understand where the audio quality, why I'm having bad audio quality and what's happening. So with this, it's saying, and this is kind of, you can tell this is very much my MVP tenant, because in reality, what you'll see is this won't be a flat line. What you'll really have is that number will be significantly higher. And what you'll see from that is that the firewalls is telling you where the firewalls are blocking it, or tell you when they're blocking it. And then from that, we could try to find out why and what's going on. So we can then ascertain which calls are being blocked, find out the volume of it, and we likewise could see whether or not there's blocking the media ports, and we start triaging that as well. So obviously, I'm running on a clean internet pipe. I'm not behind a proxy. I'm behind a Meraki firewall, which I configured, so I know that I've opened up all the ports for that. Likewise, if we wanted to look at this and start triaging what's going on with the environment, and we see that we're having a much higher percentage of failures because of the media being blocked, or whether or not the firewall's blocking the calls itself, we'll be able to understand and ascertain that. Let it pull through. Again, we can have multiple filters to this. So right now we have everything inside the corporation. So this is all internal calls, because of the way I've set up my building information. I've just said that everything's internal. I just gave it basically said every single subnet, so that way I can start trying to show some reports. But in reality, what we could do is where it says inside corp, we could say what's happening outside our organization. How many of these calls are actually bad when we don't control the network? What's happening? Are these people trying to VPN in? How are we doing this? And we can start getting an understanding of what's going on with the audio quality. Likewise, any rate my call information, and start pulling that back. Okay, that's very vital, because we need to have a good understanding of what the actual clients are saying. And the clients are saying in this case that, a month on month, we're doing fantastic, we're doing a stellar job. For whatever reason, in the month of March, we had 10% of our calls, or 9.09%. I'm not sure how it's 9.09%, about 2 out of 20 is not 9.09%, but we have the ability to start triaging this content down and ascertaining what's going on. The client's reporting to us what's good and what's bad. I don't have any information here because I've turned this off with my tenant, but something else, by default, 10% of the phone calls are queried. So you'll have a pop-up that says, what did you think of the phone call? Can you get out of 5 stars, what did you think of it? And you can see this back in, you can see when I turned it off back in October. This is what happens when you were trying to understand what the people think of it. And this is what I'll call out, and one of the things I've learned since I've been doing this is that this is very different depending on which physical location and geographical location you're at. And the reason why I say that is Americans are really good at complaining, right? But likewise, they're very good at telling you when things are good. So they're more likely to go and give it a 5-star and then bin it off and then do what they need to do. The one thing I've noticed about British people is they'll only complain or comment on it when there's a problem. So if you have an SLA for whatever reason that you're going to meet the call rating, at least now you can report natively from the tooling. So you can see what people are saying, see what people are feeling. Just remember that this is definitely different by region by region. Let's see if we can pull it up. No. So I haven't got it. But we can go in here, find out what's going on, what happened on the 4th of October. It just tells me that nobody's responded back. It's fine. But we can go back and see what, we had a 5-star report, what they were using, what the headsets they were using. So they were using Plantronics, a Poly BT600. Okay. Yep.
Is there a particular metric you would try and get a customer under, the ratio of poor calls?
The problem you have is ratio of poor calls, like run the reporting piece, like rate my calls, or just, so obviously what you want to do is you want to have it near as zero as possible. And when you start, what you would do then is you would look at the actual metrics of what you're doing. So if I'm running out, 400,000 calls per month, and we're pushing the system quite good, and we're trying to find out where things are at, and if I realize I see that scope going up, I would say anything greater than 1% of phone calls being rated bad or having a bad report is too high. So absolutely less than 1% of your phone calls should have any sort of reporting of being bad at all. In reality, you want to bring that down to 0.5%. But with this as well, I could find out, back to the reporting piece, I could find out which versions we're using, so OC is the full fat client, the Skype client. I could find out who's using what. I could see what versions we're running, Teams, Windows, everything else, different versions, and then everything back down to the Skype for Business client, which is still called iPhone Link. And then amazingly, I've got this blank one, which is I believe that to be I don't know now. It happened today. I'll have to figure that out. Maybe the Skype for the Teams mobile client. So the important thing to hear is there's a few things you can do. The first thing is to upload the building content, which you could do from here on the top. The buildings content will give you the ability to find out what your subnets are. So that tells you which geographical location they're coming from, tells you which building, which floor. You can make this as granular as you want. So if in buildings you have, or different universities or different campuses you have different subnets, you group those logically that suits you. Likewise, if you wanted to take that to another level and you say, listen, I only worry about per country, so you would label out the subnets that you have there in each country, and then you upload that, and likewise you tell it from when you started that. You upload the content, and there's the templates already there. I know Martin Bohm's done one back towards the end of last year that had this piece in it. Now, the one thing that's not obvious that you need to do as well is that endpoint one. So the endpoint one, although it's blown up in the bubble where it says you're building the information, this is where you put your endpoint piece. And again, the same thing, what's my physical information on my laptop, what am I running, and then it pulls that information back. That's logical for you. Again, there's templates available on TechNet to pull those things through, be able to pull that, and then you could pull upload the template in here, and any no good templates you have will start propagating below. And you can see who's done what and when. So you can find out who's uploaded the template. So if things change or your reporting doesn't work, you can find out when they were uploaded and when they were updated. So what do we get? What additional pieces we have? And some of the key information that we have now, and one of the things that are important to remember is that it's kind of on the right-hand side where we still have SIP URIs, and we have UPNs. And the reason why we have a SIP URI is that, remember, Skype uses SIP, and Teams uses HTTP. And so we need to pull all that new content down. So as we move into the new world of Teams, we still want to be reporting off all that content. And as we're running against a hybrid environment, or if we're running against people still using Skype for Business online, or whether it's on-prem and Teams, we need to have the ability to still pull that content through. So it's important to be able to capture both of those pieces. Likewise, know how the ability to the short calls and the call data records and the SLA goods and all those things. They're really important things I try to show you in the earlier bit. With addition to that as well, we now have the ability to, we've got new RBAC roles. Now, the new RBAC roles will allow us to have more granularity about who we're supplying this call data record information to. So do I want HR, or do I want help desk, or who do I want to be able to see that visibility within that, and I can create it for them. Likewise, it's important to note that these other roles, that the ones down below, the reporter, the report reader, do not give you information around the end user endpoint pieces. The trying to keep up with regulations for that without the personal information within the end user components, because realistically, these guys are just trying to triage different communication bits rather than actually drilling down and seeing what type of physical endpoint they're using, or what everything that's inside that far right-hand column. So what did we get out of V3? We have that quality drill down. So we find out what's going on with regions, what's going on by hour. It's constantly being updated. Everything's coming through. We got that reliability drill down. So we have the same, but we can find out how reliable the clients are actually connecting up. We now have the ability to pull through that the rate my call piece. So historically, that was tremendously difficult to try to get out. It was loads of PowerShells. It was doing SQL queries, trying to get everything back. Now we have that rate my call aspects to it, and it gives us the feedback that what the perception is of the end user to be able to get that content back. Likewise, we now have that help desk piece. So we now see what's going on with peer-to-peer calls, what's going on with meetings, and zooming in and zooming out of who's belonging to the end user bits, who's actually been involved in that conference and who's not. We could then go move that thing forward, and we start understanding what the requirements are on the endpoint. So are the endpoints drastically out of date? Are they running an unsupported version of Teams? Are they running a version of Link, and they shouldn't be logging on anyway? So we should be preventing those things from happening. We can start driving the understanding and ascertaining what versions they're running on, so we can manage our own IT department properly. Again, that goes back down to the client versions and the endpoints. So we then have the makes and models, whether it's a PC or if it's a Macintosh, what's the aggregated information we're pulling through, and have that single view for that. So I've given you some of that already. So what's the future? What do I see as the future? Is this Power BI stuff. And some of the Power BI stuff I've seen is really, really, really clever. So it's still very much in tap. So people are still figuring out what's happening with it. But we know that the Power BI stuff's coming. We know that some of the screens that we've seen is coming through, and like the bottom one says that we know the CQD is ultimately going to be replaced by some of the things that people are going to be able to do, because the information you have in there is alarming. So here's an example of what some of the stuff we can get. So we can drill down to the particular days. We can find out, we can customize these things to exactly how we want them to be, so we can have the information that's relevant to you. So you create your Power BI dashboard, and then you may have to use a contractor or something like that to come in and validate it and pull these things through to see what's happening, and then pull that and make sure that you're happy with what's being presented. And then you can customize this to look exactly how you want it to. And here's another one example. So which regions have good calls, which regions have bad, then qualify what's going on within that. Likewise, we can have audio good, percentage bad, and stream these things out. And you can customize your Power BI, because remember, Microsoft is allowing you to have access to the REST information to pull all that back.
So all these sites and locations, is that based on your data that you're loading in CQD?
Yeah.
Power BI pulls that from CQD?
Yeah, so what you do is you give it the subnet information for locations. It gets compiled within the CQD, and the CQD then gives you the REST information to pull that through into Power BI. Yeah. So these locations are down to what we've said they are. So if we say that everything on this subnet belongs to the United States, then they pull that through. And again, here's another example of another Power Dashboard. But again, we can see what's happening, how many of the current tenant, how many are good, how many are bad. We can then customize this information to be exactly what we want it to be. Okay. Something else that we could do is, again, it says here, the scenarios used for the divine targeting. So what happens if people are joining? We can have alerts to these things where we can realize that people who are joining meetings from a Wi-Fi connection are shocking. What happens if people are joining over a mobile phone, so using LTE or 3G or 4G to create up, and they're using the callback from it? How do we then do the content information over wired or wireless? How do we start pulling things? We can start pulling this content back and alerting against it. Likewise, we can go find out how many incidents are open with help desk. So now that we have tighter integration that we've seen that was announced yesterday and today around ServiceNow, how do we tie these things in? How do we tie that, create that flow between the incidents being created and what's going on with ServiceNow and all these things and what's going on with the Wi-Fi, so we can start triaging what's happening with the network. So if we find out that the APs in this office are creating us grief, then we have that alert created up and then we pull that things through. So we can be smart about how we're using these things and create flows to be able to do these. And likewise, we can start getting drivers for the devices. So if we realize that a particular type of HP machine doesn't have the right video driver or right microphone or a headset or whatever a driver, or doesn't have the right wireless, it's causing us problems, we can start troubleshooting that, and we can then analyze against what's going on the Power BI dashboard to be able to triage that for us. So we can say, these HP machines running with this wireless access point, with this wireless driver is causing us problems, and we can start trending that against Power BI. So what's happening in the future? We're going to see some of the stuff. We're going to see the rest of everything coming together with the V2 to V3. We're going to start seeing V2 stuff shutting down. We're going to see more things in Power BI showing up within the modern portal. Likewise, we're going to see some of the things, the call quality dashboards going through. They're going to retire the call quality CQD link. I expect that to happen later. That's not going to be anything that's going to happen imminently. And then we'll start seeing some of that machine-generated stuff that we saw a second ago. So what happens in the really clever stuff around these end bits, so the incidents, the networking, the driver components. And so kind of bring things to a piece on this. A lot of things that I've been working on, that us guys have been working on together, is around the conference, around Evolve, around the 21st of October, and in Birmingham, at the NCC, or the National Conference Center. Any questions?